Similarly to Blueprints, Widget Blueprints is also a combination of a prefab and a C# script. I've prepared this simple Unity project where there's a health bar, and if you press enter, it simply applies damage and reduces the health bar with 20 HP until it reaches 0, where it can't reach any further. So let's try and replicate this in Unreal. So I'm just gonna make a new folder for my widgets and right-click, User Interface, Widget Blueprint. And just select User Widget and call it WBP_health bar. And let's open this up. So just like Blueprints, where you have this more prefab related view, you also have the graph where there's the code side of your interface. One difference that you'll probably notice immediately is that the UI in Unity is a bunch of game objects in your scene. And in Unreal, the entire hierarchy is going to live inside your Blueprint widget. I want to begin by simply creating this health bar node that I have in Unity. In Unity, this is just a simple game object inside the canvas. In Unreal, you don't really have game objects per se, but you do have these panels that you can add to your hierarchy. If we add this simple overlay panel to our widget, this is basically the equivalent in Unity to adding a new game object and adding, let's say there was something equivalent, but adding in an overlay component to it. It's the same as game objects, but they each have custom functionality on them. And the overlay panel is a very performant and very simple kind of panel where you can simply overlay multiple images on top of each other, which is perfect for a health bar, where we have several components to create this unified UI element. So in Unity, I have a frame, which is the white box around the health bar, and then the no health bar, which is basically when you remove health, there's gotta be this color underneath, which is this thing. And then the health bar, obviously, and then the health points, which, you know, is the text. And this we just added. So yeah, these are the components. So let's try and do the same in this widget. I'm just gonna begin with adding the frame. So let's rename this to frame. One thing to note is that right now we're simply making the health bar and not the entire HUD that fills the whole screen. So yeah, the widget we're making right now is only going to contain the health bar. And because of that, we don't want the widget to fill the entire screen. So let's fix that right now. If we select custom here, and let's change that to 400 by 35. There we go. So right now the frame that we added is not filling up the entire size of the health bars. Let's fix that. So if you select the frame and you click on this button and this button, now it should fill the entire overlay. For the health bar itself, I'm going to add a progress bar and make sure that it is beneath the frame. I'm just going to rename this and let's make it fill the space. And I'm going to add some padding. And let's change the color of the health bar. So for the health color, let's make it red. And let's add some percentage here. Now you see it's going to have this weird dark blue color, and that is because for some reason this tint is blue. So if you just switch that to white, it should get back to red. Let's make also the background color to something a bit darker, something like this. And now we can change the health bar. And finally, let's add the hit points. So let's just add it here and call this health points and just write something that makes sense. So like 70 out of 100. And let's align the text to the middle and scale it to match the size. I'm also going to change the font size to be a bit smaller, like 18. So let's compile and save this thing. And now you might be asking yourself, well, how do I even add this to the scene, since you can't really drag and drop it? Here's where it gets a little bit more complicated than it is in Unity. So to add this interface to your scene, you're going to have to create it through your player character. In Unity, my player is simply a game object and it has a component that I created myself. But in Unreal, there is an entire system for player characters and how players control those characters. So if you go to Window and click on World Settings, you'll see that there's a default pawn class and a player controller class. You'll notice this HUD class, and this is a class that you can basically ignore. It's a legacy class from Unreal Engine 3, I believe. The new way to create interfaces through the widget blueprints. So the class that we're interested in is the default pawn class. This is where we want to create our widget. And right now it points to default pawn, which is a built-in class that we're unable to modify. So these are all part of the world settings, and you might even call this the scene settings because this is connected to the scene that we're in. So if I were to open a different scene, then these settings might be completely different. So you're basically telling Unreal, how do I want this scene to be handled logic-wise? So to create our widget, we need to create it through a character class. But even if we make our character class and create it this way, we're unable to select it through this interface. So why is that? Well, we need to create our own game mode as well, since the default game mode has some hard-coded values. So let's begin by creating a new game mode. So right click here, Blueprint class, and select game mode base. And I'm going to call this BP underscore game mode underscore UI basics. There we go. Now if we go to this dropdown, you'll see BP underscore game mode underscore UI basics. Let's select this, and now you're able to change these values. So let's create a new character class from which we can spawn our widget. Select character. I'm going to call this BP underscore character underscore UI basics. There we go. And now if I click on this dropdown, I should be able to see BP underscore character underscore UI basics. So let's open our character so we can create this widget. If you open your blueprint and you see this view, don't panic, you can simply press this button to get the whole interface. Let's just get rid of these two nodes, we don't need them. And right click, create widgets, and connect these two. And then from our dropdown, select the widget blueprint that we created, which is right here. So this node will spawn the widget in the scene, but it won't actually draw it. Let's add it to the screen. So if you drag here and type add to viewport, and compile and save this. And now if you press play, it's going to look all wrong. And that's because we created our widget as a sort of prefab that only has our health bar. It wasn't designed to be the entire HUD for the screen. Let's create a widget that will act as a HUD for the entire screen. So right click, user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, WBP underscore HUD. And let's open this up. Now if you go to user created, and you scroll down a bit, you'll see your own health bar widget, and drag this and put it in here. And now you'll see what we saw when we press play. And how do we fix this? Well, we can right click on this and wrap with a canvas panel. And the canvas panel is kind of like the overlay panel that we used for the health bar, but it has more functionality and is also a bit more expensive. But for something as complicated as an entire HUD, then we need more flexibility. So now you have the canvas which fills the entire screen. The scale of our health bar is kind of wrong right now. So let's make that 535. And now let's go back to our character. And instead of spawning the health bar widget, let's spawn the HUD widget. So WBP underscore HUD. Compile and save and press play. Now we have the health bar shown properly. So as far as I know, it is recommended to split up your interface into several widgets and then combine it into one HUD. This is basically the equivalent of going in Unity and taking this health bar game object, for example, and making a prefab out of it. And then you're able to tweak the health bar on its own. The benefit, of course, is that you can build these generic modules that you can then share across different projects. In Unity, we have these anchors, which you probably know very well. So if you click here, you can all click to center it, and you can add some padding. Unreal has a very similar system. So if you click on anchors, you'll see the same kind of menu show up. It even has a description down here telling you how to update the different aspects of the interface. But right now our anchor is in the top left, which makes sense for this interface. But I would like some padding on this thing. So let's add 20 on each. Yep, that seems about right. So let's take a quick look at how I made the health system inside Unity. It's pretty simple. There's a health variable, and it makes sure to keep the health variable between 0 and the max health. On awake, I make sure to update the UI. And when you take damage, of course, I also make sure to update the UI. And of course, I listen to input, which calls the take damage function. So back in Unreal, let's open the character. And let's add two variables, one called health and one called max health. And I'm going to change this to integers and compile. Before we can listen to input, we need to tell this blueprint that we actually want to listen to input. So if we go to class defaults and you search for input, and under auto receive input, select player 0 and compile. And now we can right click and if you type enter, key, and this one. So when we press enter, we want to apply damage. So this is a built-in function that exists on every actor. And although it's called apply damage, it doesn't actually do any calculation for you. You have to do that yourself. And for damage actor, we need to point at who's getting the damage. And for this case, we're going to apply damage to ourselves. So if you left click, drag, and type self, get a reference to self. So this means that when you press enter, you're going to apply damage to yourself. And I'm going to apply 20 damage. So this function is going to call an event on this actor, which is ourselves. And the event that it triggers is called any damage. So let's add this any damage event. Let's drag the health variable in here, get health. And from this, I'm going to add the subtract node and subtract the damage that we received. Now that we've subtracted the damage, we want to reapply this value to the variable. Now we could connect this to this, but as you see, you'll get this conversion node. And that's because if you hover your mouse over this damage variable, you'll see that it is a float variable. And our health variable is an integer. So it's converting the float variable into an integer before it sets the health value. So this is kind of unnecessary. If we just select this and delete it, you can right click on this pin and select to integer. And now when you connect these two, it looks nice and clean. To make sure that health never gets below 0, we can add a max node. Just gonna move this over here and plug this into here and plug this into here. So now it's going to take this value and check which one is the maximum and plug this into the health variable, which means it will never get below 0. And before I forget, let's set the default value for these two variables. So I'm just gonna set this to 100. And also this to 100. All right, now we're ready to look at the actual widget itself. Let's open it. Switch to designer view and select the health bar. And for the %, if you click on bind and then create binding, this will create a new function where you can calculate how you want this value to be applied. So to get the health bar %, we're going to need the character's health and the max health to calculate the percentage. So if we open our event construct, and this is the equivalent to the event begin play in normal blueprints. And when this widget is created, we want to get hold of the character. So if you right click and type get player controller. So this gets us player 1 and we want to get player 1's character. And the way we do this is by adding the get controlled pawn node. If you hover the mouse over this pin, you'll see that it returns a pawn class. And our class is not a pawn class, it is a subclass of pawn. So we're going to need to cast this to our custom class. So cast to BP underscore character UI basics. So let's plug that in. Now that we have the character, let's save this to a variable. If you right click on this pin and click promote to variable, it's a handy shortcut to create new variables from pins. And I'm just going to call this character. And now that we have our character, we can use it in our get health bar % function. So if I drag this in here and get character and I get health and I also get max health, and then we divide the health by the max health, and this is going to give us the percentage. And we simply just plug this into here. And as you can tell, it's trying to convert it back to a float value. So let's remove this and convert it to a float here. Where is it? Here. And connect it like this. And now we should have the basics. So let's compile and save this and give it a try. And there we go. And the last thing we need now is to update this health point text. So let's go back to our designer and select the health point. And just like we did with the health bar, click on bind, create binding. So let's get the character, let's get the health and the max health. So these are integers and we want to create a string out of these integers. So if you right click and type append string, there we go. And let's plug in the health in the first pin. It'll convert the integer to a string, which is fine. And let's add a third pin so that in the middle we can add space / space and then connect the max health to C. And now we've created a new string out of these two values, which we can then plug into the return value of this function. And it's added a converter from string to text. The text variable type is just like string, but it has some formatting functionality. Compile and save, and oh, look at that.